his senior officer, Captain Henderson, got wounded, and he went to save him. And while he was bringing him back in a wheelbarrow, he got shot in his leg. And he was brought to hospital in Brighton.
A royal palace in Brighton, although designed with Eastern pretensions, was still an unlikely setting for a military hospital to house wounded Indian soldiers.
We're now approaching the music room, which is one of the most popular and one of the most vividly decorated rooms in the Royal Pavilion. And like many of the rooms in this building, it was used as a hospital ward for Indian men. Now, strikingly, this room is perhaps one of the less peaceful rooms in terms of its decoration, and one can see the rather vivid snakes and the dragons that adorn the wallpaper, etc. It's a very unusual place to have a hospital, and one can't help but wonder what the wounded men felt in their beds, lying down, looking up at these very vivid, almost sort of martial images they saw around them.
Over 4,000 injured Indian soldiers were brought to the Royal Pavilion, and many were surprised by the opulence of their new surroundings.
Certainly the letters we have for the Indian soldiers themselves indicate that they were very, very honoured by the fact that they were given space to actually recuperate in a royal palace as they saw it, which was also augmented by the fact that King George V made 2 visits here in January and August 1915.
The care the Sikh soldiers received in Brighton led to a strong sense of personal duty to King George V. In a letter home, one Sikh soldier wrote, "May God grant long life to the generous-hearted sovereign who has deigned to think of his humblest soldiers."
In the First World War, when this building was used as an Indian military hospital, this room was not used as a kitchen at all, but it was used as an operating theatre. And there were over 70 operations conducted here that we know of.
As a thank you for the manner in which the injured troops were looked after, a new gateway to the Royal Pavilion was donated by a Sikh Maharaja on behalf of the Indian people. But for Manta Singh, there would be no recovery at the hospital and no return to his homeland. Saving the life of his captain led to the tragic loss of his own in 1915.
My grandfather was only 27 years old, and of course leaving 2 small kids back in India was difficult for grandmother to bring them up.
The outcome of the First World War, the early stages of it, certainly without the Indian Army contribution, and of course Sikhs were a large part of that contribution, I think the war might have been very, very different. The Indian Army contingents arrived during the First Battle of Ypres, just in time and in just enough numbers to block the gaps. They certainly saved the British from what might have been an embarrassing retreat back to the Channel ports.
The Sikh and Hindu soldiers who died at the Royal Pavilion were cremated at this spot, just outside Brighton, now known as the Kshatri Memorial. They were all part of a death toll, which by the end of the conflict numbered over 9 million lives.
Certainly in the award of gallantry medals, the Sikhs were certainly overrepresented, not only in Victoria Crosses, but in other gallantry medals as well.
But any Sikh soldiers who'd hoped that their loyalty during the war would be rewarded with greater autonomy back in their homeland were in for a shock. Within months of the war's end, Britain reverted Punjab back to martial law under a repressive regime which reached its nadir in April 1919 in the Sikhs' holiest city. British military orders led to the shooting of 1,500 unarmed men, women and children at Jallianwala Bagh for taking part in a peaceful demonstration against British rule in what became known as the Amritsar Massacre.
They'd fought as a voluntary force for another country, for a campaign which didn't affect them, and this is how they were treated. So there was betrayal, and they felt cheated.
By the start of the Second World War, Anglo-Indian relations were increasingly fraught due to the rapidly growing independence movement, leaving many Indians facing a dilemma of loyalty. Nevertheless, India's Sikhs, Hindus and Muslims again answered the British distress call, with over 2.5 million signing up for action, the largest volunteer army in history.
India is in arms, training troops as fast as they can be trained. Latest reports show that 80,000 men a month are joining the Indian Army.
The Sikh contribution to the Second World War was exceedingly important. They probably formed about a quarter of the combat units of the Indian Army. So that they were in tanks, there were infantry, there was Sikh artillery, so huge contribution.
And behind the lines of troops, and forming a solid bond with them, a teeming population of workers, young and old, are making the weapons of war for their countrymen to wield.
It's very key for the Allies, particularly in the West, to have the numbers that they need to hold back the German advance in North Africa and to push up Italy towards the heartland of Europe. So the contribution that Sikh soldiers make and the contribution that Sikh airmen make during the Battle of Britain in particular, where every single pilot counts, is a very key contribution.
In the summer of 1940, the German Luftwaffe's bombs pummeled Britain's towns and cities in a bid to hammer Britain into submission.
Millions of firebombs rained down on the great city of London. In a matter of minutes, more than 1,500 different sections of the city burst into roaring flames. Flames that swiftly merged into the greatest fire in recorded history.
Britain sent out a plea for foreign pilots to help defend the country from the threat of Nazi invasion, and Indian fighter pilots were among those who flew to the rescue. One of the first to sign up was a young Sikh, moved by the plight of the British people.
I took part in the operations against the Germans in Europe. London was being bombed day and night. It was almost every day a scene of fire. So then I felt that I was fighting for the right cause. England was alone in 1940, and we had hardly any defense. So that was the time when I started feeling that we have to sort of fight for survival. And that was the reason that I continued to fight for the next 4 or 5 years. Whenever I traveled to Uxbridge from London Central, we had to take the underground Piccadilly line. And I would find the platforms full of people. There was hardly any space even for us to get into the train and come out. Their plight was really pitiable at that stage. So we have to fight to win the peace.
Pujji soon found that the combination of a turban and RAF wings made him a popular figure in wartime London.
People here had never seen an Air Force officer with a turban, and wherever I went, they felt very sort of obliged. They said, "Oh, you're fighting for us." I stood in a queue trying to see the Gone with the Wind film. That was a long queue. I stood at the back, and as soon as the man in front of me looked at me, he says, "Sir, you don't have to queue." I mean, no. And when I went to the ticket counter, the girl there, she said, "You don't have to buy a ticket, sir. You can go in." I wrote to my father, I says, "No one could better place to die than a place here. See, because these are the people who love me and respect me."
That affection was reciprocated as Pujji spent the next 5 years flying dangerous fighter sweeps that saw him cheat death on several occasions.